Hey guys, it's Jen, and I just want to let you know that you're going to hear right now part one of a two-part series. It's an interview with Margie Smith, not my mom, somebody else, and she's going to talk about the Visalia Ransacker. So, part one is the background, her experiences, what it was like to be a young mom at that time, and what was going on, and how her passion for finding the Visalia Ransacker was lit, get started. And then in part two, you're going to hear more about how the case started to come together and how things started to make sense. So, welcome to part one, and I hope you enjoy both parts of the interview. Things to do because so many people have their points of view and experience with our dear friend, Mr. DeAngelo, and have dealt with these crimes in all different ways. And today I have Margie Smith with me on the line, which is kind of hilarious because that's my mom's name. And so for a while on Facebook, I was getting confused, and I finally had to put a glass of scotch next to my mom's name so I'd remember that was her, because this Margie Smith drinks wine. And so that's been kind of funny. But Margie, it comes to us from the Visalia angle, which I think really hasn't ever gotten its due. There's so much to the story, and of course, none of the crimes, except for the death of Mr. Snelling, none of the crimes are being charged in Visalia. The 26 counts right now currently pending, and so, but there was a lot of drama, angst, criming going on there, and a lot more lives touched in Visalia as well. So, Margie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yes, I was in Visalia. Well, I was born and raised here, only gone a few, months out of my whole entire life, and I'm 70. I was 25 and 26 when our Visalia Ransacker was busy, and I was very, very aware of what was going on, even though most of Visalia wasn't. Nothing in the newspapers when he was breaking into homes, absolutely nothing. I did have a friend who, well, she would be my brother-in-law's mother-in-law, my brother's mother-in-law, there we go. And she lived on Redwood, so she was very much aware because she had police officers in her kitchen. She had a police scanner. And so when the ransacker was out, she would call me because I lived on Tulare Avenue around the corner, and my husband was remodeling, doubling the size of our house. The whole back half of our house was plastic, and he worked swing shift. So you can imagine my fear, because I knew that there was this person out breaking into homes and ransacking. I would sit by a picture window with a loaded shotgun. I had 3 sons. The youngest was just a baby, had just been born. So I was definitely afraid. I was 25, 26.
Margie, Margie, tell me, in terms of years, this is before, so I come into the story in 1980. Of course, the rapes were happening starting in 76. This is early 70s. When is this roughly?
Okay. Yeah, Visalia Ransacker was, well, there are reports that the Visalia Ransacker was 73 to 76.
Okay.
For sure, 74 and 75, and then there, after December of 75, there was just a little hint. So yes, and I remind everybody, go ahead.
We didn't have phone. I remind everybody that we're on landlines. We're with the daily paper. We're on, national news and local news is maybe the radio, and maybe out of in Visalia. I don't even think Visalia came out of Sacramento or Fresno. Where did news come from then?
We still have Visalia Times Delta. It was a local newspaper, and then of course Exeter, which is just a quick drive away, 10 minutes on the highway. They had the Exeter Sun, and so they had their small town newspaper, Visalia Times Delta, and then there was a Tulare Advance Register. So we all had our neighborhood newspapers, but there was thing ever
But
in the
television.
newspaper.
Yeah.
Nothing was on
interesting.
TV. Nothing was on TV about the Ransacker ever. And,
Ever. That's what I thought.
Yeah, and our TV came out of Fresno. ABC.
Okay, Fresno.
Yeah.
Okay, that was your affiliate, was out of Fresno. So
correct.
So yeah, I just, for anybody currently, it's such a different time the way news travels. I remind people this a lot because right now we're seeing the news as it happens.
Right.
That's not how it works.
Not at all.
We got the news in a daily dose in the paper, and then it was reliant upon somebody putting things together to see that there even was a trend or a pattern or anything.
I think
so now, I'm sorry, I just want to take people back.
I think there was more investigative journalism back there too. I think you actually had investigative journalists who would research and who would go out and, interview. And I don't see that in our Visalia Times anymore.
Yeah, I for sure locally, our investigative journalists have unfortunately been defunded. We still thankfully see some of this at the national level, but yeah, I absolutely agree that people were motivated. I wanted to be a journalist back then. That was one of the reasons why, is that journalists were essential to keeping power in check and to getting real answers. And for people would talk to them candidly where they might not talk candidly to the police. So yeah, I missed that because that was really important. So.
Yep,
okay, so thank you. Just wanted to go back to that time just so folks remember it's not like today where you can Google something. No, it was word of mouth. And so by word of mouth, you got the warning that put you in front of that big window with a gun. I can't even imagine. And a baby, and 3 babies in the house, but one actually a baby, but 3 babies in the house.
Yeah, 3 little boys.
By yourself.
And I was 25, and Greg would come home about 11 o'clock, and during election years, it was always much later because he printed ballots. But when he would get home, I would be up, 11:15, 11:30. And he worked in Exeter. So, it'd take him a little minute to get home, and then I would go to bed and we'd sleep. And so then in 75 is when I started work part-time. And this is, okay, so on my notes, you see something about a suitcase full of jewelry. I'll go back to that later. But in 75 is when I started working for Bill Rose, and he was real estate, and I was his in-office secretary. And I think I was his first, if I'm not mistaken. So that, when I was working for Bill, is when we had another murder, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on that now, but we had a little girl that had been murdered in Exeter, and the gentleman, Oscar Clifton, worked for Bill Rose, and he had come through the office, and the girl behind me said, "Oh, he's so nice. It's too bad he's crippled." And it stuck in my mind because I thought, well, what a stupid thing to say. And then Oscar Clifton had been picked up for murdering this little girl in Exeter. And Bill was his alibi, where he was to be that day during the murder time. So Bill had to go to trial. And I remember when Bill came back into the office after he had testified, I said, well, what do they have him on? What do they have of this Oscar Clifton? What evidence do they have? And he said, well, they found a receipt book where her little bike was found, where she was abducted. And I said, well, that's stupid. He didn't do it. Why would his receipt book? Okay, he drops his receipt book and he doesn't notice it. Try and figure out, in your mind, how did he get a little girl in his truck and drop that receipt book and her bike all by himself? Anyway, so that was my first introduction into that case. And so then time went by, and that's all I said was, well, that's stupid. He didn't do it. So then time goes by, and we move from my location on Tulare Avenue over into, it's called Beverly Glen. And that was in 1979, and I was 29 years old. And so the Visalia Ransacker was gone, but I started collecting, I sat up in bed one time. Now, this is going to sound stupid. I sat out in bed one time and I said, Greg, I know who the Ransacker is. And, I was sweating and my heart was pounding and everything. And I pointed my finger at the neighbor across the street. And so I started looking into the Visalia Ransacker, and my friend that had lived over on Redwood had saved a lot of newspaper articles, which she later gave to me. And then I had also been saving a lot of newspaper articles. So I started going down to the library, and at that time everything was on microfilm, and I would get absolutely.
Which, by the way, for anybody who hasn't used those, they make your eyes want to kill themselves.
You get seasick.
The worst.
You could only do it for maybe half an hour. Well, I get seasick anyway, so doing that, I would just get so sick to my stomach. But I would find an article, on something else that happened, another, like coins being stolen, but they never referred to it, of course, as the Ransacker. So I would print out anything I could find. Well, then, when there was a 5-year anniversary of Claude Snelling's death, going back to the Ransacker, that was September 11th, 1975, when any anniversary would come up, there would be something in the newspaper that they were still looking, and so every 5 years, there's an update.
We went through the same, yes.
Yeah.
Time for an anniversary story, yes.
Exactly. And at one point, and it was in, I think, 80s, I have that one too, Mr. Snelling's daughter, Beth, her son, wrote a letter to the editor and asked people not to do that. They didn't want to keep rehashing it, and it hurt their heart when they would see, anything in the newspaper. And so they literally wrote a letter to the editor asking the newspaper not to do that anymore, which I thought was well, how are they ever going to solve it if they don't get help? Okay, so now we moved into the McGowan neighborhood. I was pointing a finger at the neighbor across the street. And one night there were cop cars out in front of our home. And so I went out and I talked to the police officer and I said, what's going on? And he said, oh, this person is probably on cocaine, that he's really, he's threatened his parents. So anyway, I said, well, I think he is the Ransacker. And furthermore, I think you got it wrong with Oscar Clifton and the Donna Richmond murder. He said, what? And I have no idea why that came out of my mouth. Just because 5 years, things you just, your mouth just talks. And
yes.
So he said, okay, well, we'll look into this person. And so he came back in a week and he said, nope, can't be him. He doesn't have any burglary in his background. And I said, well, I'm pretty sure you're wrong. Okay, so I set off really looking into that fella who a year later they came back to me and they said, can you come on down to the police station? We think you may be right. Okay, so at this point they have put together a binder on him. He had been picked up for murdering a gal named Julie Wilson, and his trial, I think, was 1983. So anyway, they came back and they were trying to link him as the Visalia Ransacker, and he was being held for murder. So I continue research forever and ever and ever. And I think it had to have been probably, I'm going to guess it was 1980. I didn't know the difference in a sheriff, a police officer, a district attorney, a prosecuting attorney, a defense attorney. I was totally, it would be like computer language. It was out of my realm. And so in researching Oscar Clifton, I saw that Jay Powell was our district attorney who literally tried that case. And I knew him personally by sight because he had come over when our house was being remodeled on Tulare Avenue. So I gave this Jay Powell a call. And I said, you know, we had about a 45-minute conversation on the telephone. And I said, I have a feeling you put Oscar Clifton away and he was innocent. I think it was our Visalia Ransacker who killed that little girl. So here I am talking to Jay Powell, who is the one who literally tried Oscar Clifton. And I'm saying, I think you made a mistake. I don't think it was Oscar. I think it was this other person. Okay, so then I started getting followed. Everywhere I looked, here was Jay Powell. Here was Jay Powell and his wife. Here was Jay Powell's investigator. And we would always get together, my family, for Sunday lunches. And I remember one time telling my sisters and my mom about this Jay Powell and, you know, how I'd contacted him. And they all thought I was crazy, by the way, you know, just any involvement in anything like this. So as we were walking out and I was saying goodbye to the family, and this is a Sunday afternoon, Jay Powell is going about 5 miles an hour by my home. And he was very distinguishable by the hat he wore. Anyway, and I said, see, right there he is. Another time, I mean, this happened continually.
Sounding like you're paranoid, and you're like, by the way, he's right there.
By the way, there he is, yeah. And
There.
you know, I waved at him. And the weird
like,
thing
you're
about
trying to
this,
figure out if you were legit, like if you were a crazy loon, or if
well, pretty much everybody at the time thought I was a crazy loon. You know, why in the world would you get involved in this? And I said, because I don't think Oscar Clifton was guilty, and how can I not? And I think whoever murdered that little girl also murdered, or was our Visalia Ransacker. And so that was early on, you know, that I started that mantra, just blah, 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 blah. And one of the things that I had pulled from the newspaper was they had, I think maybe at that time, 5 unsolved murders in Visalia or in Tulare County. And one of them was Jennifer Lynn Armour. So there were only maybe 3 newspaper articles on her, but she was in November of 74, and she went to Mount Whitney, the same as Beth Snelling went to Mount Whitney. And so I started wondering if maybe the Visalia Ransacker also murdered Jennifer Lynn Armour. Okay, so now we have Jennifer Lynn Armour, we have Donna Richmond, and they are, you know, both found in Exeter. We have Jennifer Lynn Armour, who was picked up.
Oh, they're both found in Exeter. How interesting. Okay, they're both found in Exeter. Huh.
Okay, now Donna is December of 75, and she is found underneath an orange tree off of Spruce Avenue and Marinette. And she is found under this orange tree, which is, I've got to guess, maybe 25 yards from, not even, 25 yards from the Frank Kern Canal in Exeter, right off Spruce and Marinette. Jennifer Lynn Armour in November, so we go from November to September, November of 74, she was found a little bit north between Exeter and Woodlake, floating in the Frank Kern Canal.
And we all know our friend has an affection for canals.
Well, and we also then later on find our friend is the police officer in Exeter. Okay. So,
oh my God. Okay, sorry, I forget. Okay, thanks. Good to make that current. Okay, yes, let's remember that, folks.
Yeah,
okay.
We're gonna. Yeah, you know, 45 years is really hard to encapsulate. Okay.
So. Tell me about it. I do know. It's okay. It's okay. We have time. Take your time.
Okay. So now we have Jennifer, who is from Visalia, who is walking to a football game, our famous, you know, we have a famous football game every year. She's meeting her girlfriends in the parking lot of Kmart. Kmart is a block to the west of Beth Snelling's. So we're in the same neighborhood as Beth Snelling. Jennifer and Beth both go to Mount Whitney. Now, Donna, of course, she was a student in Exeter. So now we have the two girls in Visalia, and then we have the one in Exeter. And I kept saying, they're all the same. They're all the Visalia Ransacker, blah, 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 blah. And I was getting nowhere at all. So at some point, after I contacted our district, let's go back to being followed by our district attorney. There was a new restaurant in town, and it was Abel's Meat Market, and it was upstairs on Moody Boulevard. And I was working for some farmers in Tulare, and so for National Secretaries Week, the boss, his son, another secretary, and they took us to lunch there. We were the only people in this brand new restaurant upstairs. So we're the only people up there, and all of a sudden this big fat guy with a big belt buckle comes walking up the stairs, and he comes up and he looks right at me, and then he goes back down the stairs. Well, who do you think he comes up with? Jay Powell.
Oh my God.
Hello again, Jay Powell. I'm, of course, oh my gosh, here he is again. Well, then one time my son was at the Visalia, which is the junior high. He came running home from school, and he said, Mom, these guys are following me. Two men are following me. And so my husband at that point said, you're done. I don't want you doing this anymore. You're putting us all in danger. Also, I have to go back, and I can send you a picture of this. Also, after I had contacted Jay Powell, one of our cars, we had I think it was a Datsun pickup, was stolen out of our driveway, and it was found demolished. It had been run into a walnut tree again and again and again, and just, blew the radiator, just tore it apart. And this happened on the corner of Caldwell and Lovers Lane. Now, if you go further down Lovers Lane to 264, that's going to definitely, if you ever get into paying any attention to Oscar Clifton's thing, Oscar, of course, was in prison by now. 264 is where Oscar had lived and ties into Donna Richmond's murder, very definitely. So when I was called to the Visalia Police Department, Cody Woods, whose picture was in the newspaper as an investigator of another incident, I took him out to show him where our pickup had been destroyed. And the people who hauled it in, Caesars, said whoever did this was filled with rage because they'd never seen anything like this. It was just gone completely. I have the paperwork where, they hauled it. I never saw it again. My husband did. But so that is another thing that happened because of my involvement in that wasn't the only pickup. That's not, I was going to say that's not the only one though. So that's 1981.
No, wait, so in this time, so everything, okay, so you're living in Visalia. You're connecting dots that others aren't connecting because this happens to be of particular interest to you, and you had a relationship with Mr. Clifton, right? Or with Oscar.
Actually, I had only seen him at that point one time when he came through the office.
Okay, so you just, so it just didn't make sense to you, and the evidence was particularly weak, and there was so much glaring evidence. So, and Mr. Powell was the prosecutor.
Correct.
And had his
he was our
squad as, okay,
he
so
was
he's
our
an
voted
elected
in DA.
official. Right. Okay, so and we know, I hate to sound like horrible, but we know that these guys tend to have their squads. These guys protect each other because that's how it works. So what right now you're thinking, I have said something out loud that people don't want said out loud, which is you might have got the wrong person, right? And he's now seeing you somehow as a threat.
Correct.
Maybe not that big of a threat. Maybe he's thinking, if I just intimidate her, she'll back down. Certainly worked with your husband. I don't blame him. He's saying, honey, this is getting ridiculous, and now your car is decimated. I mean, intentionally destroyed. And how do you look at your husband and go, honey, do you understand corruption? Like, how are you guys talking to each other? I mean, how is that relationship? What is this doing to your relationship?
My husband and I were fine. He thought I was crazy. And I was also a new Christian at the time. Well, not a new Christian. I had recommitted my life at that time. And I remember sitting on the bed, and I opened up the Bible and came to the verse, and I don't have these memorized. And it said, be still and know that I am God. And so I remember I thought, okay, it's time to just put this aside. And so for a while, I was a good girl.
Can I just take a moment about the language here, because often women are often called crazy. And you just said good girl, and there is so much that also is correlational to women's experience of not being taken seriously and somehow being poo-pooed and shoved aside. Pretty girl, go sit over there. You're just supposed to look pretty and be nice, and where's dinner? So I want to point that out. I point that out for listeners who wonder what, they know some of that still happens today, but it's just that idea of like, this is all the hurdles. And women held the key to a lot of this crime because they knew, they saw what was going on, and these crimes were against women. So, okay, sorry.
I think we also had, I know I have always felt I had a sixth sense.
That intuitive. It's that intuitive knowing. Absolutely. I have it. So I understand it.
You know what it is.
And I think we all have it. Yeah. You have to, and you do have to be quiet to hear it. You have to let it come. So, okay, go ahead. Yeah, I totally get it.
So the other thing, when I am researching, I have, as you say, an investigative mind, and it seemed like everybody that I would talk to would have some sort of a connection to the person that I was looking at as my person of interest. And this is what's so crazy. I thought it would be solved instantly because I was so smart. They're just going to put this all together, and they also think that it's this person. And so, and where my pickup was found, Cody Woods, the detective for the Visalia Ransacker, he told me, which now I look back, and he was probably saying what he wanted me to hear, but he said where my pickup was found, the Visalia Ransacker had tossed a lot of guns. Now, I have never heard that from anybody else other than Cody, and Cody is deceased. He moved away and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I can't ever verify whether there were guns found where my pickup was, and it doesn't matter. But I do remember him telling me that. And if that is true, that would put our friend out in the neighborhood where Oscar Clifton, all that had happened in 70.
Where it had happened.
You bet.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we're talking 81. So then the question is, was our friend around in 1981? Well, if you ever have another chance to talk to someone, I have another friend who I have met through this whole thing that was definitely under his, he was after her. She was definitely being targeted. There's no doubt about it. So that's
I want to take a beat. For everybody listening, and I'm going to try to follow up with some of the people Margie's talking about, but this is not, I think folks that listen to this podcast have heard this before. Several people have approached me that absolutely believe that they were victimized by DeAngelo, that they had an experience with him. They're outside of parameters, or there wasn't enough this or that to conclude them, but I absolutely believe them. And I believe this man was prolific, and that we don't even begin to know the extent to the damage that he did.
Correct.
And I'm hoping that, I can give voice to those that want to be heard, and you can decide if you believe them or not, but I don't think it matters. I think it's important to at least hear the stories, even if it's just to document this time and these crimes. So
Exactly.
yes, I absolutely believe you've met people that have had an experience.
Oh, most definitely. Well, especially when you have some evidence that has been dropped off at your house, and I'm going to tell you about that in a little while, and I'll send you some pictures. But at some point, so when my neighbor across the street went to trial and he was convicted. Now, mind you, I had talked to Jay Powell, and I had said, I think this person across the street was the Visalia Ransacker. Now, he went to trial and was convicted of murdering Julie Wilson, which later after his death was overturned. But anyway, at that point, that was 1984, I believe, when he was tried and went to prison. It could have been 83. In 1984, we had a second vehicle taken from our driveway, and it was a Volkswagen Campmobile. And we had just finished fixing it all up. It was all cleaned up. It was all new paint job. It was just gorgeous. My oldest son, by this point was 16 years old, and I don't even know if he ever got to drive it. I think he did.
Oh, okay.
I think he actually took it out and learned how to drive it, pushed it down the driveway and took it out to learn how to drive. Anyway, with mover asleep in bed. So that vehicle was found north of Visalia on, I can't remember the name, Riggin Road or something. Anyway, it had been burned to the ground, totally torched. So that happened right around the time that the person that I was pointing the finger at as being the Visalia Ransacker, he went to prison. And right after, this is at the same time we lose another car. So then I have to think, and I started looking at some paperwork trying to put this together. For some reason, we had a new computer, and I didn't even know what it was to Google something, People had told me about, you enter in a question and voila. So I entered in Visalia Ransacker, and I remember it took me to the AE board, which Archangel 76. Okay, that
AE,
probably
AE television.
Yeah.
That's the Archangel Entertainment
EAR
TV, like a board.
Correct.
Yeah.
This fella had put together a website, and it was the AETV website having to do with the original Night Stalker. And so I went on there, and I signed in, and the very first thing it took me to was a guy who went by the moniker Late for Lunch. That ended up being Russ, O-A-S-E, and I can't pronounce his last name. Okay, so he said, does anybody, it took me right to this, and the question was, does anybody know anything about the Visalia Ransacker? So I jumped on, and yes, blah, 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 and started yakking, over the months ahead about Jennifer Lynn Armour, Donna Richmond, the Visalia Ransacker. I would type out, because back then I didn't know how to scan or anything else, I would type out all of the newspaper articles so that people could.
Oh my God.
Yeah, literally. I would type.
Oh my God.
And I would say, okay, that's it for tonight. Tomorrow I'll finish that article. I mean, it was, oh my gosh. And so people were questioning everything I was saying, because Russ he was looking into the Visalia Ransacker, and he had come to Visalia And we haven't even talked about McGowan. Okay, so there was another incident with the Visalia Ransacker where the police officers had a stakeout. And this was in December 8th, I believe it was, of 1975, right before Donna was murdered. Okay, they had a stakeout, and that was in the Beverly Glen neighborhood. And the Visalia Ransacker, they later determined, walked by a window, and McGowan went out and was about to catch him. And I mean, there are cops all over this neighborhood. Was about to catch him, and he jumped over a fence, and it was not a tall fence, a small fence, turned around, took off his mask, and shot McGowan's flashlight. So McGowan, gets shrapnel in his eye, and
he was shot in the eye.
Yeah,
I know he survived the shot.
Yeah,
and I know he provided a good ID, right? He provided a good ID.
He is the one. He's the one who drew the composite of the Visalia Ransacker, and then later they were able to link him because of the young girl who was living there. She was 19 years old, and I can't use her name, but anyway, she was being stalked. She worked over at the Visalia, across from Mount Whitney at the Baptist Church, and she was being stalked. And there are so many of the ransackings that happened in this neighborhood, the Beverly Glen. There were 4 distinct quadrants, and Beverly Glen would be the northeast quadrant. And then there's, and then Beth Snelling, that would be the northwest quadrant. And we're divided by Mooney Boulevard. And then there's the Royal Oaks quadrant, and then there is south of Mount Whitney, and it kind of goes over to Watson. And we do have, as you know, the waterways. We have the ditches. We have a ditch that goes through that area. And that was the other thing. I remember in 75 being told, okay, they think he's out. The dogs are all barking around the ditch. And so they would be looking for him in the ditches. Okay, so I have met late for lunch online, and we go back and forth, and there's another person called Ista, I-S-T-A. She ends up being from Georgia, and she is a researcher. And so she and Russ, and then another person called Night Driver. He's deceased as well. His name was Biff. Anyway, so
his name was Biff, B-I-F.
Biff
I love
Byron,
that.
and he was from Sacramento. He lived in Old Town Sacramento. And I went up and met Russ and Biff one time, drove up and met them, because I think it's easier to talk to people when you know what they look like and you know who they are. And so I was going
also,
up.
I want to know if your husband knew you did this. Oh
he was with me, and my mother was with me, and Biff
was
Biff was a bit of a strange person, to say the least. I don't know if he had whatever that is when people cuss all the time, walk around mumbling and cussing.
Yeah, Tourette. Yeah.
Tourette. He kind of seemed like maybe, but we met at, I think it was the Sheraton downtown Sacramento. And it was so embarrassing because I had all my notes. I was meeting, by the way, at that time with Elaine Stoops. I was going to go meet with Elaine Stoops at the Sacramento Sheriff's Department about my person and the Visalia Ransacker and trying to tie it to the East Area Rapist. Well, anyway, when I talked to Biff, he's walking around yelling and screaming, and people are just staring at me. My husband and my mom are sitting inside the hotel watching this guy who actually he kind of looked like a street person. He was not clean.
Okay.
Anyway, so I met Russ on the way up there, and then later on, Russ came to Visalia, and he had some important papers that I was able to get copies of, having to do with the Visalia Ransacker and Mr. McGowan, who was the cop who died, by the way, a week after Russ met him. And so I continued on researching with these new papers and getting to know a lot more about the Visalia Ransacker. And if you have ever gone onto that AE site, EAR/ONS, there's a timeline that is included on that Archangel put together, having to do with every home in Visalia that was hit. And I think at that point there were less than 100 listed. And so I was always interested when they said,
take a moment and say you just
take a breath.
I think there were less. Well, I think there were less than 100. That's less than 100 is how we measure these things.
Yeah, they would always
how many
say that.
all in? How many all in do you think it by the end?
Well, now they everywhere I read, they talk about 125, and I don't know where the others came from.
Okay.
Because
but
I think I only saw 96.
Okay, 96. That's ridiculous. Yeah. That's a ridiculous number of homes. That's 96 families terrorized. 96. I mean, that's crazy. Okay.
And the reports
that's not
that I had.
Everything else. That's not East Area rapist. That's not murder.
No.
This is so early.
Yeah. This is in 74, 75, when he is a cop, breaking into these homes, and everything he would take was just so ridiculous. There was no value to it.
Okay, guys, we're going to end part 1 right there. And I'll be back with part 2, where she's going to pick up this conversation. And I'm repeating a little of it in part 2 so you know where we are. But let's talk more about what he did when he ransacked when we come back with part 2. By the way, be sure to rate, share, subscribe. It means everything to me if you are participating and subscribing to the podcast. Thank you so much.